Hey guys, so again I'm gone and I'm going to teach this on the video, and today we're going to be talking about amphibians, so frogs and salamanders. So amphibians spend part of their lives on land and part of their lives in water. That's what defines an amphibian. The most aquatic ones spend their entire lives in the water, and the most terrestrial ones spend most of their lives on land except during the mating season, but they always come back to the water for at least part of their lives. They're considered tetrapods, meaning that they have 4 limbs or 4 appendages. All vertebrates are included in this group except for fish. So in their first organism that we're going to talk about this semester that actually has legs and arms. And they are divided into 3 orders. So we have order Anura, and those are the frogs. They often live near and in water. They also inhabit drier areas, although generally not the desert. Some have suction pads on their feet that allow them to live in trees, like tree frogs. And most frogs eventually return to the water to breed and lay eggs. Next you have Sicilians, and these are one of the least well-known groups of amphibians, and they are in order Sicilia. They are legless, so they're kind of snakes. They're not snakes, they're not reptiles, they're amphibians, but they look like snakes. It'd be hard to tell the difference unless you knew what a Sicilian looked like before. They resemble large earthworms. They have the characteristics of vertebrates, including vertebrae, a closed circulatory system, and jaws. Then finally, we have the order Caudata, and that is salamanders. They hatch from eggs in water as larvae that typically breathe with gills, and they do go through metamorphosis as they transition to a terrestrial or semi-aquatic life. There are many variations on this general lifestyle. Amphibian structure, we already talked about them being tetrapods. But first, besides that, we're going to talk about their skin. And their skin is interesting because it's permeable, meaning that gas exchange can happen through it. So part of how amphibians are going to breathe is through their skin. In fact, there are some species that only breathe through their skin. Some have gills, like we just talked about with the salamanders, so they're going to get some of their oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange through the water. Some also have lungs, probably most have lungs, which will be the first organism that we've talked about to actually have lungs, in the sense that we think about them. The skin is thin and moist, and in fact it needs to stay moist for it to continue to exchange gases. The blood is oxygenated as it nears the skin, and then it also releases carbon dioxide by passing through the skin. Mucus is secreted when the animals are on dry land to make the respiration more effective, to keep it moist. And they also those who have lungs exhibit buccal pumping. Buccal pumping is a process used to pump air into the lungs using the lower parts of the mouth. So when you see that big throat bulge on a bullfrog, that is called buccal pumping. Now, it's not only respiratory in nature, it's also a mating call as well. Typically, the larger the frog is able to perform buccal pumping, the more dominant he is in the hierarchy of frogs. Circulatory system. So this is the first organism where we've gone in detail on the heart. Frogs have a 3-chambered heart, which is interesting because we have a 4-chambered heart. In the frog's heart, or in the salamander's heart, there are 2 atria, meaning 2 spots where blood initially comes in, and then there's 1 ventricle. Now this is less efficient than a 4-chambered heart because you can kind of mix the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. But on an animal as small as a frog, it's a cold-blooded animal that's not going to need to be as efficient. It's fine for them. The blood picks up nitrogenous waste from the body, which are then filtered out through the kidneys again. And they produce more urine when underwater because they can replenish the water easier. And that is something that's different between amphibians and fish. So fish, when they pee, we talked about yesterday with the goldfish and Amelia's poor little fish, they produce ammonia. In amphibians, they don't produce ammonia, they produce urine. And we'll talk about that more when we get to mammals. But we're going to talk about uric acid when we get to reptiles tomorrow, and on Monday when we get to birds. They produce uric acid as well. Amphibians will eat anything that they can fit into their mouths. They're generally herbivorous as larvae, but then they turn into carnivores as adults. And like I said, they are metamorphic. So frogs and salamanders go through metamorphosis from tadpoles into the adults. What cannot be digested passes through the cloaca, the meeting point for the digestive and urogenital tracts. And so I've heard the cloaca described as what Steve Jobs would create if he were to design a butthole. And so the cloaca is not only where food goes out the body, where the food waste goes out the body. It's also where nitrogenous waste, so think pee, goes out the body as well. And this is better looked at through reptiles and birds, so we'll talk about this more tomorrow. But essentially, everything comes out the same hole. Pee and poop. So it's efficient. Nervous system. They have a central nervous system composed of the brain and the spinal cord, and it's protected by the skull and the vertebrae, just like on fish. They have a peripheral nervous system where nerves are flowing out of the central nervous system, and this allows the brain to direct the muscles and the sensory organs to provide information to the brain. Some frogs and salamanders go through something called torpor. Torpor is a metabolic strategy, and it's kind of like hibernation. It's essentially where they go to sleep for a very, very long time, but it's a more deep sleep. They're almost dead. They're all but dead. Hummingbirds do this as well. And there's two different types of torpor. There's estivation, and that's the practice of frogs living in hot places, burying themselves in the mud at the bottom of lakes, and that allows them to cool off. Hibernation is a practice of going into a protected torpor state during cold weather. And basically, it's when you're not going to be able to get a lot of food, so you don't want to waste your energy resources on being active when you're not going to be able to replenish that energy. So you go into a torpor to use the minimal energy possible, the least energy possible. Reproduction. So frogs usually reproduce in the spring. Male frogs will attract female frogs by croaking, again the buccal pumping. There is something called an amplexus, which is a position where the male grasps the female from on top and behind a fertilizing egg as the female lays them, so they practice external fertilization. And this usually occurs near in a body of water, because think about it, the eggs will, when they hatch, will turn into tadpoles that need to be swimming around. Salamanders find each other by scent instead of by sound. They perform amplexus but fertilize internally, and some species are oviparous while others are viviparous, meaning some lay eggs and some give birth live. Adolescents can look drastically different from the parents. Frog tadpoles lack legs, like we saw with the tadpoles we raised. Salamanders do have legs and a finned tail when they are born. When they hatch. Care of young varies. Some species leave their eggs as soon as they are laid. I've heard one biologist describe it as they look at their egg, they say a prayer over it, be like, Jesus, you saved my eggs, and then they leave. Yeah, they don't care about their eggs. Others actually guard their eggs and protect them, and then there's one species, this is so gross, the eggs are laid into their back. So they carry their young in their skin, and then they pop out like pimples. It's a really disgusting process. Ecology. Tadpoles provide food for a lot of fish, and then the adults conversely eat up all the insects. So they're really good at eating insects like mosquitoes and other stuff like that. They eat other invertebrates as well. Now, there is something that was noticed in the 1980s, and it's called chytrid fungus, and it kills off frogs. 30% of all amphibians in the entire world have been affected by it. There's also something called J. lividum, and that is a bacterium that makes frogs immune to the fungus, and we're working on inoculating the frogs using J. lividum to protect them from the fungus among us. And that's it. So, you guys are going to be doing an amphibian summary, so make sure you get that done. You can either do a frog, a salamander, or a Sicilian. There's an essay and a diagram that comes along with that 10-sentence essay. And then you're going to watch Bill Nye. So hopefully that will be fun. Okay, have a good day, and I'll see you guys tomorrow to talk about reptiles.